Hey, welcome back. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to create a widget. Now, widgets are different from theme to theme. You might have a widget that displays some tweets, or you might have a widget for Flickr, or you might just have a simple widget that displays some text. And it's really up to you how you use widgets. So what I'm going to do is show you a widget that I've created for this framework and explain as best as I can the necessary steps. And hopefully on top of that widget, you'll be able to create your own. So remember in functions PHP, let me just open that. I have a section here called load the framework, and I include this init.php file. Now this init file will now require the framework widget businesshours.php. So our widget is basically a PHP file. Now onto the actual file. On the very top, you can see the widget businesshours.php title, and then some information about the widget, which is essentially a plugin. So you got to include some of this stuff, like a name, plugin URI, description, version, and information about the author. Next, you got to do two things. One, declare the class and name it however you want, and then extends WP widget. Basically, you're creating like a child class of the WP widget class. And the WP widget class has all the functions and all the stuff you need to properly work with widgets. Basically, you're taking advantage of this API to create your own widgets. After you create this class, you must add a hook to the very bottom that takes the widgets init class that is used in WordPress, and then it fires up this class, the register widget, with your widget name. And this will essentially create a new widget, which will then be appended to the backend in the widgets section, just like you see here. So right now, I have a widget called Alpha Business Hours, and I can click and drag and put it in any of my sidebars. Now, onto the class itself. To create a widget, you need 4 functions. You need a construct function that will initialize the widget and also specify some information about it, like name, description, and class name. Then you need a form function which will render the widget in the backend area, which is here. Then you're going to need an update function which will process the widget's values, for example, when you save the widget. And then you have the widget function which will display the widget onto your page. So if I take a look and my page here, at the very bottom I have this meta widget, for example. Well, the function that rendered this as HTML in my page is this one, widget. Okay, so now for each one, I'm going to talk briefly about it. So you have the construct function. Basically, it's like an initialization function. You give the widget an ID, you give it a title, you give it a class name that will eventually be applied to the HTML, and then you give it a description that appears right here, a custom widget that displays business hours. Next, the backend layout for the widget. You start with a defaults array. It means an array of values that will be used the first time a widget is being used. I have 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. here. If I drag my widget into a sidebar, you can see these values, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. If I delete it, however, and change this from 9 p.m. to 8 p.m., refresh my page, I bring it up, now it's from 8 p.m. to 5 p.m. Okay, so basically you're creating this defaults array for every field that you'll have in that widget. In my case, it's title, description, Monday to Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Next, you have this instance variable, and then the WP parse args. Well, this is used basically to blend the values from this instance variable with the defaults. That's probably the easiest way I can explain it. And then you have the HTML for the widget itself, meaning the HTML that will be rendered here. It's this label, all of the inputs, the text areas, and so on. So basically, we have a label, and then an input with a class widefat, which is a class used by WordPress. And then we are using some information from the widget itself to populate some attributes like this one, label 4, and this one, we're getting the field ID for the title. And we use the same in the ID of the input, so the label will point to this input. So as I said, this whole function will display the widget here in the sidebar. But what happens when, let's say, I add a description test and I save it? Well, when I save it, the update function is called, and it has two parameters: new instance, which contains the new values, and old instance, which contains the old values. So what we're doing here is basically update the old with the new, and making sure the values are sanitized first so that users don't accidentally enter some HTML that might break layouts, or enter even some PHP in there, which can be harmful later on. So once every value is updated in the instance variable, then we will return this. So then once we save this, it stays like that. And now if we refresh, you're going to see this business hours test, which is the description we just added, and then the hours. Finally, the function that is responsible for outputting this bit of HTML is the widget function. It receives two arguments, args and instance, and args is basically an array of all the arguments of all the properties of the widget, and we use the extract function so that everything inside that array is extracted as variables. Then we start displaying the before widget, which, if you remember from functions PHP, was defined, let's see if we can find it, was defined right here, before widget. So inside this function, this little bit will be displayed, of course, replacing these values with the correct ones from the database. Then displaying the title, displaying our fields, and then displaying after widget, which is again something that we defined right here. And that's basically it for the widget. Now, I didn't write the whole code with you step by step because widgets are sometimes optional in WordPress theme, and I just wanted to focus on all the essential stuff first. Okay, so now the framework is almost complete, and as you can see in this shape, it doesn't look too good. It's not styled at all. So that's what I'll do in the next lesson. I've written some styles for it, and I'm going to walk you through them and show you what they're all about.